Welcome to the next installment of Charts in Perspective, where we use charts to dive into the world of economics and financial markets. I'm Jennifer Nash, an economic and market research analyst for Vetify. Today, we're going to look at our monthly update comparing full-time and part-time employment. The BLS uses data from the household survey and uses 35 or more hours as the arbitrary divide between the two categories. The focus is on total hours worked, regardless of whether the hours are from single or multiple jobs. The Labor Department has been collecting this data since 1968, a time when only 13.5% of U.S. employees were part-timers. Over 55 years later, that number has now reached 17.2% as of April. Our first chart is a visualization of the trend in the 21st century, with the percentage of full-time employed on the left axis and the part-time employed on the right. We see a noticeable crossover during the Great Recession when part-time work increased and full-time work declined. Now let's zoom in a bit closer to see the impact of the Great Recession on employment. The reversal began in 2008, but it accelerated in the fall of that year following the September 15th bankruptcy of the Lehman Brothers. In January 2010, shortly after the official end of the recession, part-time work peaked at 20.1%, while full-time work reached an all-time low of 79.9%. Afterwards, the two cohorts slowly drifted apart, with full-time employment increasing. Interestingly, this trend continued even during the COVID pandemic and recession. It was only until recently that we started to see a slight reversal in this trend, with full-time work slowly declining while part-time work is on the rise. As of April, full-time employment made up 82.8% of all employment. We've seen robust job numbers lately, suggesting a strong labor market. Yes, the economy is adding jobs each month, but it's important to note that the type of work being added to have a clearer understanding of where the labor market actually stands. The increase in part-time work has certainly skewed some of the jobs numbers over the last several months. Now here's a longer-term view of the same chart that we've just seen dating back to 1986. With the extended timeline, we can see a few more examples of what has typically happened to these two kinds of work during a recession. You'll notice that the recessions from the early 90s and early 2000s saw similar action as the Great Recession. Full-time work declined while part-time work rose. But again, this was not the case during the most recent recession in 2020. In fact, full-time employment peaked in April 2020, possibly because of a shift in the type of full-time work available at the start of the pandemic. Now, one more interesting feature in this chart is the dramatic change in the full-time part-time ratio at the beginning of 1994. In January 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement came into effect. This was a trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico aimed at reducing barriers to trade and investment among the three countries. While NAFTA led to increased trade and economic growth overall, it also had various effects on employment. Some industries saw an increase in part-time work due to outsourcing or changes in demand, while others experienced a decline in full-time positions. This chart, as well as the previous two, are seasonally adjusted and cover the entire workforce, which is defined as individuals aged 16 and over. However, this broad definition does pose a few challenges. Firstly, it includes high school and college students, a population that adds summertime volatility to the full-time part-time ratio. Additionally, the 55 plus age group includes some individuals who opt for part-time work as they transition into retirement. So this last chart is used to better illustrate summertime volatility by focusing on the change in full-time and part-time employment for the 25 to 54 workforce. The government's data for this cohort is only available as non-seasonally adjusted. The summer months are subject to temporary shifts in employment, with full-time employment spiking during the June to August period. So, to help us recognize this seasonality, I've highlighted the June, July, August months in a lighter color, which as you can see are obvious outliers. The 12-month moving average for the two series help us identify the slope of the trend in recent years. Again, we see that more recently the trend has started to reverse, with part-time employment increasing while full-time employment has decreased. The BLS's monthly employment report is a wide collection of data. The full-time part-time ratio is just a tiny piece of the whole, and the 35-hour threshold is arguably arbitrary. Nevertheless, this is a metric that bears close watching as we try to understand where the economy is headed. Well, that's all for our discussion on the latest full-time and part-time employment data. Thanks for tuning in. For more economic and market insights, you can find my content regularly on the Advisor Perspectives website under the AP Chart section.